All right, last but not least, we have shareholders' equity. And shareholders' equity tends to be one of the trickier concepts for people to uh, really wrap their heads around. Remember that this is the value of the company to its owners. When we assess the relationship A equals L plus E, if we're thinking about defining equity, we can define it simply by moving L to the other side of the equation, and that yields A equals assets minus liabilities. And this is a truth in terms of when there's a bankruptcy, the order in which claimants are paid off is that the people that the company owes money to, the liability holders, they are paid first. So in terms of order of payment for bankruptcy, it proceeds, anyone with a liability gets paid first. So all those people who hold bonds that we owe money to and interest to, they are paid. All of the other companies that we owe money to, all of our accounts payable, all of that has to be taken care of first. Then it goes to the preferred holders, the preferred stockholders, and then it goes to those who hold common stock. So that's the order of payment in the event of bankruptcy. In that spirit, it's sometimes referred to as the residual value because it's what's left over. It's what's at the bottom after we get rid of all of those liabilities and pay those people off first. Now, common stock or preferred stock, I lump them together. There are differences between them. However, we're not too obsessed with that in this particular chapter. We're more interested in how it's valued. Understand that this account, the stock account, is restricted to par value. So it's valued at the par value of shares that have been sold. And par value is not the current price of the stock. Par value is just an arbitrarily set, very low dollar value amount that each company must set on its stock for legal purposes when it incorporates, and it's also disclosed on the balance sheet. We also have to have a disclosure for the number of shares that are authorized, issued, and outstanding, as well as those par values, and any other options that are on the stock. Additional paid-in capital. This is when the stock is purchased, the amount over par value that is paid for the stock. So if the stock is issued for $20 and the par value is 2, then the amount of APIC that we would recognize is 18. And so I'm going to do a little journal entry real quick here. A company issued 1 million shares of 1 cent par value common stock, and 1 cent is a little high, actually. A lot of companies go lower than a cent when they set their par values. If we look at that, then we're thinking about the journal entry here. They issued $1 million of that 1 cent par value for $30 per share. So when you see the word issued, that just means sold. It's a term we use when we're selling things on markets. Typically, we issue shares, we issue debt, we issue bonds. In this case, we're issuing stock. They buy it for $30 a share. So we are attracting new owners. They become owners as they're buying this stock from us. And the company would receive cash for $30 million, which of course is just the per share price that we offered on the market multiplied by 1 million shares that we issued. Now, what else does the company have to record? Yes, they got cash. They financed their operations by issuing stock and have a lot of cash on hand from that stock issue. However, now they also have more people owning their company. So we record that with a common stock account. And like I mentioned, this is held up only to par value. So we would take that 1 cent amount, multiply it by the 1 million shares, and that yields $10,000 of a credit. Everything over this amount that was received by the company for those shares becomes additional paid in capital for the common stock account, CS, right? Because we could have additional paid in capital from preferred stock or treasury stock sometimes. So then we would have $29,990,000 of APIC, which is just the amount that was paid in excess of that common stock, right? Or if you want to see the product, $29.99, right? 1 cent less that amount per share, $29.99 multiplied by the 1 million shares is the other way to think about that on an individual basis. These are obviously both equity accounts because we're talking about equity. And understand that once we sell the stock initially, right, this is only for a new issue of stock, an IPO, an SEO. Once we sell it, it's locked into these prices. We do not change common stock or APIC accounts as the stock is bought and sold on the market, only when we are putting new shares into the market. Treasury stock. So treasury stock is stock that we've repurchased, that our company has bought back from shareholders. When we buy it back, then the journal entry for that transaction is a debit to treasury stock and a credit to cash for the price that it was purchased. This debit to treasury stock reduces equity, and because we're spending cash, because we're buying it back from our shareholders, it reduces assets as well. And this is always at the repurchase price. So your instinct might have been, wait a minute, they're buying back stock. Shouldn't I be debiting the common stock account? I get that instinct, and it's not actually how we work it. Treasury stock is a contra equity account. So it reduces equity and is increased by debits. So rather than reducing equity by debiting common stock, we reduce it by debiting treasury stock because it's my contra equity account. Retained earnings, we are starting to get familiar with, are the undistributed earnings of the company. So it's all income I've earned in my company since its incorporation to the present date that has not been paid out as dividends to its owners. At this point, we know two things and are aware of only two things that affect retained earnings. And if you haven't learned it yet, it is imperative you learn it before the next exam. Yes, retained earnings will have a beginning balance. If we have net income, then it will be credited to retained earnings. If there is a net loss, then that would be debited to retained earnings because net income increases retained earnings and net losses reduce retained earnings. Dividends always reduce retained earnings. Now, retained earnings is an account, and there's very few accounts where this is true. It may have either a debit or a credit balance. If we've sustained a number of losses over time, we haven't earned any income, then we would just be debiting this account to the point where it would have a debit balance. So it is an account where we can have a debit balance. However, if there is a debit balance, we cannot pay dividends. We have to actually have earnings in the company in order to return any of those earnings to our shareholders. And finally, there's accumulated other comprehensive income. And I just want to briefly touch on it to say it is similar to retained earnings, but it's going to collect gains and losses that we have not yet discussed, but we will in the income statement chapter. So know that it exists, know that it's super similar to retained earnings, and we'll talk about it more when we get to those other comprehensive income gains and losses that we'll discuss in income. Other than that, the rest of this I want to discuss in class with you, and probably not until Thursday or after we've had a chance to work through some problems.